Hello, and welcome to my presentation about my research into student sentiments towards group work in OMSCS. So I'll start with the motivation for the project and a bit about me. So I worked at Udacity in the early days of OMSCS, and in that capacity I got credit for 2 classes, and I was also somewhat involved in a couple of other classes. And then after that I had no involvement in the program at all. And now 9 years later I'm back as a regular student. And so while I'm familiar with the program, I'm also essentially a first semester student who's trying to navigate and choose the courses to take. And as part of that, I joined the unofficial social medias, and in particular the subreddit, where I saw that there's a common discussion topic is group projects and how terrible they are. There is nothing positive that anyone has to say about the group projects. But what about the benefits of group work? Both project-based learning and collaborative learning are well-researched topics, and the consensus is that they are beneficial to students. So what is the disconnect here? So we need to go beyond the anecdotal messages from social media and try to understand student sentiment more rigorously. So my research questions are: how do OMSCS students feel about group work in the program? And what factors do the students consider when forming their sentiments? And in addition to these, I also want to get the perspective of some instructors, because we can't understand this dynamic simply from the half perspective of students alone. So there's a lot of related work to the general idea of group projects, but in particular I want to talk about the work of Calver, Campbell, and Craig from the University of Toronto. They studied the sentiments of their undergraduate CS students who were working online during COVID-19. And they've defined a taxonomy of factors that their students consider as they form their sentiments towards group work. And those factors are the effects of group work on their grades, their workload, how well they learn, and the social factors of being in a group. And of those 4 factors, all of them can lead to both positive and negative sentiments. For example, when a student considers the effect of group work on their workload, on the one hand they might think that having good partners will reduce their workload. Or alternatively, they might think that if they have bad partners who are freeloaders, then that'll increase their workload. So the same factor can either lead to positive or negative sentiments. So let's dive into what I found based on a survey of OMSCS students. So contrary to the anecdotal evidence from social media, students do not actually avoid group work in this program. And I think this is an example of negativity bias. It's more salient to post, complaints than it is to share neutral and positive experiences. And we see in this breakdown that the most common response here is that students disagree that they avoid mandatory group work. And well over 2/3 of students are at least neutral or better in terms of their feelings. We can take a closer look at the interrelationship between factors that students consider. And here I find that a student's previous experience with group work in the program correlates pretty strongly with their sentiments towards doing more group work in the future. If someone has had bad experiences, they feel strongly that they should avoid more group work. And contrary, if someone has had good experiences, they will seek out more group work. And if they're neutral, they're kind of neutral. And so I think what this shows is the anecdotal evidence. Those people were all reporting in from the top right corner of this plot, even though that's a small minority of students in general. Let's see, we can also see how the factors identified by that prior research, how well they're reflected in our student population in OMSCS. And what I found is that OMSCS students do consider workload when they form their sentiments, both in the positive and negative direction, the same way that was found by those prior researchers. And likewise, OMSCS students also consider the effect on their grades based on their joining of a group. So students both feel that if joining a group is good for their grades, they're encouraged to be in a group, and if they feel that joining a group is bad for their grades or puts their grades in jeopardy, then they are opposed to being in a group. So this also reflects what was found by that prior research. But we also have an example here of a pattern that doesn't seem to confirm what was found with those undergrad CS students. This chart, we don't see such a strong trend, and what we're looking at here is whether students in OMSCS consider the social benefits of being in a group when they are forming their sentiments towards group work. And there's not really a strong relationship here. And my hypothesis is that as working professionals mostly, we already have our social lives established, and so meeting our peers isn't really such a big consideration of ours. So in addition to those quantitative survey questions where I asked students to rate their agreement with some statements, I also solicited some free-form responses in the surveys, and I also performed some follow-up interviews with some of the students. And this got me some more organic responses. And so I took notable quotations that were provided in text or via interview, and I coded them into that 4-category taxonomy. And what I found there is that the most commonly cited challenge that OMSCS students cite that gives them a negative sentiment towards group work is just the challenge of coordinating with people in different time zones. And people also cite the challenges of coordinating schedules where they have conflicts with their work obligations and their family obligations. And people do also mention the effect of just having a bad project partner. One of the trends that I mentioned that was not reflected in the survey was the social aspects of being in a group. So when I interviewed some students, I kind of prompted them to think about what the social factors of being in a group are. And it does seem that people do enjoy meeting other students, and they consider it an opportunity for professional networking. But this isn't really top of mind, but it is something people do think about. And I also interviewed some faculty to get their perspective. These were instructors from 2 different programs. Neither was OMSCS, but they have student populations and formats where I can draw some similar conclusions from. And one of the key points I got from the first interview is that they provide their students many low-stakes opportunities to collaborate. And this addresses the problems of unfair labor distribution. People are okay working with partners at different skill levels or commitment levels if they know their grades aren't in jeopardy. And they still feel they benefit from working collaboratively, even if their partners aren't the greatest, if they know that it won't jeopardize their grades. In addition, there's some practical aspects that these instructors were considering, one of which is that accreditation agencies require universities to incorporate group work into the curriculum in some form. Another practical aspect is that group projects are easier to grade simply because there's less projects to grade if you have groups versus a bunch of individuals. And the second instructor I interviewed noted that some groups will fail because of bad group dynamics and the freeloading problem, and that this is inevitable, but it is also fortunately relatively uncommon. In a large class of 250 students, maybe only 1 or 2 groups will have this problem. And when this problem does arise, it's not fun, but it is at least an educational experience that the students can learn from. So this leads into future work, questions that we can answer going forwards. So it'd be good to investigate how specifically OMSCS classes implement group work. There's a lot of variety that I found in my interviews. And this comes to like how large is the group? Is it a partnership or 3 to 5 students? The duration of the project is also something people mentioned. Being in a group for a few weeks is different from being in a group for the entire semester. People mentioned how partners are selected affects the dynamic of the group, whether they're chosen at random or if the students somehow choose their own partners. And also the open-endedness of the project. Some projects in OMSCS are very open-ended, like in this class, Educational Technology, and some projects are much more structured where there's a defined goal, and this affects how people in a group will work together. And another avenue for future exploration would be to explore how can group assignments in this program accommodate our student population who has time zone conflicts and has conflicts with their other responsibilities. So for instance, how could we facilitate asynchronous communication and collaboration in our classes? This is the bibliography of the research I cited in this presentation. And there's additionally a lot more references and a lot more details in the complete paper. So if you're curious, I hope that you check that out. Thank you for attending this presentation.